What up, Wizards? It's Dev. Mtg, we like it of Magic, and today, on the final day of preview season for MKM, we got to see every single card from Murders at Karlov Manor Commander, aka Murders at Karlov Manor. Now, there are a lot of cards in this thing, and if I went over every single one of them like I normally do for preview season, we'd be here like 3.5 hours, and I'm sure a few of you, like 5 of you, would enjoy that quite a bit. But instead, what I think I'd rather do is just go over 10 cards that I really like from the Commander release. So I guess you can look at this as kind of a half preview video, half top 10 to get me in fighting shape for list season. You know, we got the top 10 sleepers, top 25 all coming up, got to do a little bit of training. So I think instead of a montage, which again would probably entertain a good bit of you, we'll just do the top 10 cards from Murders at Karlov Commander that looks suspiciously good. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. And we're back. Hope you had time to settle in. Like and subscribe before you do anything else. And of course, just take a second to thank this video's sponsor, Noah Chen. Not a business or anything that gave me money. It's actually just a person that gave me money because Noah Chen is the patron of the day. Remember to check out the Patreon. It actually funds basically my entire existence and lets me do YouTube stuff as a job still. So if you want to throw some money at the channel, it's just $1 a month to support things around here, and I'll let you vote on what decks we do during MKM season. But anyway, let's go ahead and get to the actual video here. The way we're going to do things is, again, it's kind of like a preview video. So my first few entries here are all going to be kind of rapid fire, but all cards I want to read over and let you know exist and maybe even have a couple of tricks with. But the last few cards we look at, including, by the way, the coffee break, are all going to be cards I go a little bit more in depth on. That's right, there's a coffee break. Look forward to that. But for now, let's go ahead and get into the honorable mention. Now, the HM this time around is Veiled Ascension from the Deadly Disguise Commander deck. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for an enchantment. When it ETBs, put a flying counter on each face-down creature you control. Face-down creatures you control enter the battlefield with a flying counter on them. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cloak the top card of your library. I wasn't very interested in this card until that very last line of text. Now, despite how I may feel in other areas of my personal life, when it comes to Magic, I'm not much of a face-down kind of guy, but I do admit that you could put this not only in your disguise decks, but of course your decks that have Morph and Megamorph and Manifest cards and stuff like that. Anytime you're going face-down, baby, this thing's going to be awesome for you. Putting a flying counter on all those dudes is great, but honestly, just getting a 2/2 flyer every turn that when you do flip it over, if it is a creature, just randomly has that flying counter still on it, that's all kind of good. But let's move on to number 10 here, which is from the Revenant Recon deck. It's Charnel Serenade, everybody. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 black, for sorcery. Surveil 3, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Exile Charnel Serenade with 3 time counters on it. This also has Suspend 3 for 2 into black. 6 mana seems like a bit much, but this is Commander we're talking about, and you got to remember that you can pay as little as 3 mana for this card, and that sounds really enticing. You know that a Forever Reanimator spell is going to definitely catch my eye, and it did. Number 9 is Tessak, Judith's Hellhound from the Deadly Disguise deck, 4 mana, 3 into red for a 3/3 legendary elemental dog with Unleash. You may have this creature enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. It can't block as long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it. Other dogs you control have Unleash. Creatures you control with counters on them have Haste. Whenever Tessak Judith's Hellhound attacks, add red for each attacking creature. Now, of course, the first thing I have to do is point out the line of text. Other dogs you control have Unleash. Beautiful. Wonderful. Excellent ability just in terms of flavor alone, but honestly, the rest of the text on the card is also very good. In fact, better when you really think about it. Creatures you control with counters on them have haste is going to count for more than just your dogs that come into play with +1/+1 counters on them. It shouldn't be too hard to engineer a way to get counters on your other creatures, obviously, and all of those dudes have haste too. But of course, I think the mana is the real attraction here, given the fact that this is effectively going to be a 4/4 haste a lot of the time for just 4 mana, and the turn it comes down, it can actually pay you back its mana cost pretty easily. You add all that to the fact that this is Judith's puppy that makes me like it even more. This is obviously a good boy, but I think this might actually be the best boy. But speaking of dogs, for number 8, we'll look at Sophia, Dogged Detective from Deep Clue Sea. This is 4 mana, 1 and Bant colors, a green, a white, and a blue, for a 3/4 legendary human detective. When she ETBs, create Tiny, a legendary 2/2 green dog detective creature token with trample. You can pay 1 and sack an artifact token to put a +1/+1 counter on each dog you control. Whenever a dog you control deals combat damage to a player, create a food token and then investigate. Sophia, very easily my favorite golden girl and very close to my favorite commander in this little set here. This lady gives you 3 different kinds of tokens. She gives you a creature token, a clue token, a food token. That's all a lot of different token types. That's especially sweet if you're doing stuff like doubling up on tokens with the myriad effects that do that at this point, or maybe you're doubling up on triggers with the million effects that do that at this point. Either way, this thing is putting more things on the table than there are in my dog's pen right now, and trust me, that's an awful lot of dog toys. That's really saying something. So this thing will just fill your board like super quickly, and in the meantime, I like that they didn't skimp on the activated ability either. This puts the counters on each dog you control. That's going to be a lot of +1/+1 counters if you're sacrificing a few artifacts. But in case you wanted to know what my favorite legendary creature was from today, we got to go back to the Deadly Disguise deck and take a look at number 7. It's Descana the Rage Mother. This is 5 mana, 2 Naya colors, a red, a green, and a white for a 5/4 legendary bear. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each creature you control with base power and toughness 2/2. Whenever a creature you control with base power and toughness 2/2, it gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Nice, just got a Meekstone from Revised in a couple of weeks ago, been looking for a good place for it in EDH. Here we are, seems decent. Now obviously the riff here is bears. You're supposed to play bears, it's very cute. And I hate to be the guy that explains the joke, but in Magic we've always called 2 mana 2/2s bears, after grizzly bears from the original Alpha. I don't know why we still do that, but it's just been a thing we've done and never stopped doing. So most of the fun of this, as far as building the deck, and that's honestly 9/10 of the fun for me every time anyway, is building the deck in the first place, is going to be like unlocking all the most powerful 2/2s from throughout Magic history, and I bet we're going to find some weird ones in the bunch once we do it. In my admittedly subjective view, one of the best things that a new card can do is make you go back and search for old cards that fit that new card's criteria and look at stuff that's in your collection in a completely different light and elevate it too. Those are my favorite cards, so this is way up on my list. But so is Final Word Phantom in at number 6 here. This looks like a pretty annoying dude. It's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 1/4 Spirit Detective with both flash and flying. During each opponent's end step, you may cast spells as though they had flash in this flavor text. Just one more thing. That's what you're going to say is anyway, isn't it? Blue mages, I know you. That's what you always say. Actually, hold on real quick. Just one more. Hey, here's the thing. It just kind of lets you play exactly the way you would want to play if you had a deck with islands in it. Like 8 times out of 10, you want to play at exactly this speed anyway. So this dude seems pretty important for, I don't know, like most blue decks for the rest of time. So as long as he's cheap, I'd go ahead and pick up a copy. He seems great. Now with this and a couple of other cards, the Revenant Recon deck is looking pretty strong, but I got to give it up for Deep Clue C. Not only does it look like one of the more powerful decks, but it's got a lot of great cards in it too, like Merchant of Truth here at number 5. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for a 2/5 Angel Detective with flying. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate. Clues you control have Exalted. Nice. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, the creature is going to get +1/+1 till end of turn for each instance of Exalted among permanents that you control. So Commander players sure do like them some Exalted, so I should say that this just goes in Exalted decks like pretty obviously, but it could also go in Angel decks. It could go in Aristocrats decks because that line of text is really powerful. Whenever a non-token, I don't love that word, but they probably had to do that, right? But whenever one of your not token dudes dies, then Investigate is actually a very powerful line of text for basically any Aristocrats decks. You know, I'm running Elisil Core right now, as you probably imagine if you know anything about me, and this thing is sliding right into that deck. Honestly, this whole deck is looking good. I'm not saying this is the one you should buy, but this does have a lot of righteous cards in it that really put like the concept of clues over the top. You know, we've already seen so many cards that make clues that a commander deck beyond just this product seems pretty inevitable at this point. And with cards like Tangled Trove Kelp, which is, I guess, sort of an honorable mention for the clues deck here, we'll throw it in. The deck's going to be pretty good. In case you haven't read this dude, he's basically a thing that turns all your clues into 6/6s every combat step. It seems okay, so the clue deck definitely has ways to finish now. But let's go back to Revenant Recon for number 4 here. This is Case of the Shifting Visage. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 blue for a case. At the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1. To solve this case, there have to be 15 or more cards in your graveyard. When it's solved, whenever you cast a non-legendary creature spell, copy that spell. You know, surveil 1 during your upkeep is already kind of fine. It's not Phyrexian Arena, but like, it's kind of fine. I'll just say that much. But obviously, it shouldn't be too hard, especially if you're anywhere near dedicated to it at all, to get 15 things in your yard. And then all your creatures, I know it says non-legendary, who cares? So just not your commander, not a couple of other dudes, whatever. So most of your creatures come into play with a copy of themselves. That's nuts. And it only cost you 3 mana to get this card out in the first place. As far as solving it, that didn't cost any mana. As far as using it once it's solved, that doesn't cost any mana, blah, blah. Just a 3 mana investment to kind of, first of all, fuel itself every single turn, but also fix your draws, put stuff in your yard to get back later, whatever you're trying to do. There's a lot of stuff you can do with Surveil 1 every turn, but basically what I'm saying is double up on every creature that you cast for the rest of the game that doesn't have the legendary subtype. Like, that seems like incredible news for just 3 mana on the front end. Like, again, you have to, I guess, facilitate it a little bit through your deck building, but not that much. You can get 15 cards in your graveyard easier than you think. But oh boy, we are almost into the top 3, y'all. And I say almost because, once I really start getting on a hot streak in these videos, I tire out quickly. I'm a very big, very tired, kind of old man. So I think I need to just kick back for a second. Relax for just a moment. And you should too. And maybe together, we'll have ourselves a little coffee break. This week, on the coffee break, we'll be stepping outside of the Commander set and taking a look at the 3 cards from the Cluedo set that I'm most interested in. We will have to, of course, begin with my favorite Orzhov card from the product. This was actually a difficult decision, but I finally landed on Afterlife Insurance. Not only the name, but the flavor text make me love this card very much. However, the actual text and rules function of the card are indeed the best part. This is just 1 in an Orzhov hybrid for an instant. Creatures you control gain Afterlife 1 until end of turn. You also get to draw a card. Afterlife means that when a creature with Afterlife 1 dies, you create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. This is yet another low-cost tool for aristocrats decks like my beloved Ellis Ilkor that allow us to sacrifice all of our creatures and then sacrifice all of our creatures yet again. It is also an excellent form of sweeper protection, and may even translate to a combat trick from time to time. It obviously works very well with effects like Anointed Procession, and perhaps one of the best parts of the card is the fact that it replaces itself in your hand. Sweeper Protection and a drawn card for only 2 mana are the floor of this card, but at the ceiling lie many, many tricks for aristocrats decks. You know I'm excited about that. You can probably hear it in my voice. Up next, we will look at a card that I feel the need to point out, for reasons we will discuss directly. This is Lonis, Genetics Expert. No longer a cryptozoologist, we must now consider them a genetics expert. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 civic hybrids for a 1/2 legendary snake elf detective with Evolve. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Lonis, investigate that many times. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. Though this card may already appear to be good in a vacuum given its baseline power level, I have to tell you that it has already formed the basis of multiple infinite combos over its short existence on the internet. For instance, Rosie Cotton of South Lane from the Middle-earth set reads, whenever you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, other than Rosie. When she enters the battlefield, you create a food token. That means that you can put a +1/+1 counter on Lonis. Now, since you put a +1/+1 counter on Lonis, you can investigate, but when you investigate, that means you create a token, which means that Rosie allows you to put another +1/+1 counter on Lonis, which means you get to investigate. You can then repeat this loop infinite times. However, you do either have to have an opponent to stop you or another creature to put +1/+1 counters on, or this loop will demonstrate itself forever without a way out. There are many more combos we could go over with Lonis, but I will give you just one more for the road because it involves a long-forgotten card from Urza's Destiny, Extruder. Extruder reads, sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. You'll be using the Extruder's ability to sacrifice a clue and put a +1/+1 counter on Lonis. This actually triggers 2 things. Not only did you put the +1/+1 counter on Lonis, so you get to investigate, thus making another clue to sacrifice to the Extruder, but you sacrificed a clue, which triggers Lonis' other ability, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on not just the Extruder, but any other creature you control. And of course, since taking these game actions resulted in you getting a clue from Lonis' first ability, you can start the loop over again and make your entire team infinitely large. Any Lonis deck can play this combo given that Extruder is colorless. That makes it a dangerous application. However, my favorite of the Cluedo cards is Headliner Scarlet. This is 4 mana, 3 and a red, for a legendary human warlock. It's a 3/3 haste, and when it ETBs, creatures target player controls cannot block this turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library face down. You may look at and play that card this turn. My initial feeling when reading this card is that every red commander deck will want it for the rest of time. There seems to be a relatively high likelihood that if this card comes down in the mid or late game of most commander board states, it will immediately end one player's night. And on top of all that, it also gives every red deck an extra card every single turn. But one of the most intriguing things about this card to me is that if you are a red mage, you have plenty of flings and other things to get this card off of the table, back into your command zone, and able to resolve that first ability all over again. This has been the Coffee Break. We truly do hope that you enjoyed your relatively brief respite from the terrifying horrors of the world. Now back to Dev for the top 3 commander cards for Murders. Feeling much better now. Fresh and easy. Let's go ahead and look at number 3 here as we start looking at some really powerful cards. I feel like I've already said a couple of times this video that this is going to be a card that every X color commander deck is going to want forever. Well, here's a card every Azorius deck is going to want forever, I think. Let's take a look at Knowledge is Power. That is a good name for a Magic card. Kip is 5 mana, 3, a white, and a blue for an enchantment. Creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of cards you've drawn this turn. So this is good, right? You know, sometimes I feel like I have more to say about like the early entries on a list because, you know, they don't look very good. So I'm like, actually, no, here's what you do with them, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, so I have a lot more stuff to say sometimes about like a number 6 than I do about a number 3 that just obviously looks incredibly powerful. This is kind of always going to give your creatures +1/+1 on your own turn. The problem is it doesn't really do diddly on your opponent's turn, except it actually does, you fools. All you have to do is have some kind of instant speed card draw. Like at this point, you have this out of Brainstorm. A single mana gives all your guys +3/+3 till end of turn, which is probably going to keep a lot of people from attacking into you. And once you attack into them, I imagine that they're going to sweat blocks pretty hard if you have any open mana and any cards in your hand too. Or if you just have activated abilities on the table, let you draw cards or whatever, they're going to watch out for those too. So it's going to affect a lot of people's math, and it's going to really make people question what all you actually have access to. You know, if you can draw any cards during a combat step, I don't know if anybody wants to block you, but if they don't block you, they lose the game. So seems pretty ridiculous to me. There are all kinds of enchantments and creatures with activated abilities and stuff to prop up a card like this, but obviously all you need is good old-fashioned card draw, which you want to do in a game of Magic anyway. Anytime you see like, hey, do the best thing in a game of Magic and do the third best thing in a game of Magic. That seems like a pretty good thing, you know? Like if I draw cards, the best thing you can do, I get to make my whole team huge, which is it's probably more like number 4 or 5 on the list, but it's still a really, really powerful thing to be able to do. But for number 2, we'll take a look at On the Trail. This is a heavy hitter right here, man. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. And here's one that every green deck wants. There's just seems like a few cards in this set that like every single commander deck wants, so long as they run that color. And here we are. Not only is this just a sweet card for any green deck period, but Joel Real as a commander is really going to love it specifically. Now this one I could actually see some people kind of not liking. It doesn't do much the turn it comes into play, although counterpoint, I think it's actually fairly easy to trigger this thing the turn it comes into play. But let's say you don't and you play it on turn 2 in Commander and you're somehow out of mana. You're supposed to have more than 2 mana on turn 2 in Commander, but either way, let's say you're out of mana on turn 2 when you play it, you got to wait a whole turn to use it. Well, then it's likely, or somewhat likely at least, to trigger on like 4 out of the next 5 turns for like the rest of the game. So that seems like it was probably worth giving up a little bit of tempo. Note that it doesn't just trigger on your turn, right? Like if you draw 2 cards on your opponent's turn, you can get to throw a land down on your opponent's turn. That seems very good to me. Am I going to bring up Brainstorm again? I'm bringing up Brainstorm a lot in this video. I just feel like, you know, for a single mana on your opponent's turn, being able to just throw a land down and draw 3 cards seems like a pretty good setup. So I don't know. I think that this card is probably kind of ridiculous, and I don't know if every single green deck wants it, but enough green decks draw enough cards that I feel like a lot of them are going to want it. But I know what at least some of you are thinking. We still got to do number 1. There are cards better than those last 2 cards in this set. Yeah, actually, I think there is a card that is so much better than any other card we've looked at today that it's actually more than borderline dangerous. I honestly think this card goes a little bit too far. Let's take a look at Trouble in Pairs. Trouble in Pairs is actually the only card we're going to look at from the Blame Game deck today. I guess they didn't make the deck look super good because it has this card in it and it didn't need any more help as a result. Trouble in Pairs is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for an enchantment. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. Well, see, you may have spotted the problem here. It's that 2 out of 3 of those things are probably going to happen on every single one of your opponent's turns for more or less the entire game. I mean, like, of course, they're not going to be attacking you with 2 creatures every turn, not necessarily, especially if you have this card out. But the other 2 things, people draw cards in Commander like crazy, and probably even more frequently than that. People play 2, 3, 4 spells, 5 spells a turn in Commander on a very frequent basis. So it's somewhat likely for this to draw you, I don't know, like 4 cards per turn cycle, or at least that's what it looks like to me. I don't know, you might be thinking something along the lines of like, well, maybe they'll just be careful about how many spells they play in a turn or how many cards they draw in a turn. And if they are careful about those things, I'm pretty sure you're winning on that exchange too. So I think the right call, like most of the time for opponents, is going to be to just ignore that you have this out and just play Magic, draw your cards, play your spells, advance your board state, do all that stuff, So in the meantime, you're just going to be drawing every card in your deck. Realistically, I've actually retaken this shot like, I don't know, 6 times already because I feel like I keep being too hyperbolic for comedic effect and saying this thing's going to draw you 20 cards in a turn cycle. But if I had to be realistic about it, I would not be surprised if this draws you an average of 1.5 cards a turn at the very least, and that's a lot. And that's a conservative estimate. There's going to be plenty of turns where all 3 of your opponents are at a crucial part of the game and they look at this thing and they're like, screw that thing, I gotta play Magic, and they just end up giving you like 6 cards that turn cycle. It could happen, but even if you're somewhere in the middle between 1 and 6 and you get 3 cards a turn cycle, I'm pretty sure the card's paying for itself. All things considered, I just kind of feel like the card is a bridge too far. I knew it was trouble when it walked in, and I'm over here feeling like Travis Tritt. I smell Trouble, and this card is going to be very important in Commander, at least from what I can tell. But that is it, Ski Special Agent Lewitsky. That's all I've got for Commander product today. But if you want to see the entire Commander release, I'll leave a link to it down there in the description so you can peruse it at your own leisure. But aside from that, there's other links down there. I'll leave links to preview videos from the last couple of days so you can catch up if you haven't done that. You can check out the link to Twitch if you want to follow over there, and you might because very soon we're going to be doing our full set review where I assign a number grade to every card in the set and I speed run it while I'm at it. I put myself through that for you, so follow on Twitch if you want to see that happen in real time. If you don't worry, it's going to be on YouTube either way. But if you want to actually see it happen live, follow on Twitch. Aside from that, I'll leave a link to the Patreon. Again, basically the only thing that allows me to continue doing this. $1 a month is all it takes. If you think it won't help, you're wrong. $1 a month helps tremendously. And you'll get to vote on what stuff we do around here anyway. Aside from that, I guess you could always like the video if you want to. That puts it in more recommended feeds, at least theoretically. I'm not sure anybody really knows how it works, but it couldn't hurt, right? Aside from that, you could subscribe to the channel. Getting a lot of subs lately this preview season. Thanks, all you new subs. Don't you want to be a new sub? We're trying to get to 132,000 subscribers, and we're actually reasonably close, just a few hundred away, so help me get there. It'd mean a lot to me. But I'm pretty sure that's the entire call to action. I'm trying to keep it short and sweet these days. They say when you start out as a YouTuber that you're supposed to do a call to action in every video, but honestly, there's a lot of videos when they start the call to action at the end of the video, I just kind of click away. So if you haven't done that yet, then I really appreciate that. Just your watch time helps me out tremendously, just so you know. But thanks for being here one way or the other. Just go in the comments section. Let me know how you felt about all my picks and what your picks would have been in case I left a couple of good cards off. Man, actually, me telling you to comment there was really meta when you think about it. That was a call to action installed within a fourth wall break about doing the call to action. I'm a master at YouTube. Anyway, shower your praise and support by liking and subscribing and commenting and doing all that stuff. But aside from that, it is all ski, Mrs. Kowalski. We will catch you cats later. I am Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.